Some blossoms.
Sure. Okay. Hello, my name is Shay. I'm going to be your guide today for the next hour or so. Just to make sure we're all on the Grand Room tour, right? Nobody on their own bus? Okay, good. Well, I know you heard the rules on your way up, so I'm going to have to go over them one more time before we get started. But when you got off the bus, you entered the museum. As we take in the view and take our photos now, I'll tell you about what we're seeing and where we are. So the surrounding land here, when you look out, that's Hearst Ranch. It's still a working ranch. At its peak in 1930, it's about 250,000 acres. Right now, it's 84,000 acres. So in Hearst time, it was a working ranch. They would have had produce. We walked through the oranges, the vineyards. So they also had a chicken coop down there. So they're pretty self-sustainable during Hearst time. But this land was not purchased by William Randolph Hearst. It was actually purchased by his parents, George and Phoebe. And so that's kind of where our story begins about why William ended up building here. So George and Phoebe, his parents, they were not from California. They were from Missouri. They actually grew up in the same town. When George left to go to California in 1850, he went in search of gold. He was a miner in Missouri. And when he left, Phoebe would have been around 8 years old. It's possible they knew each other before, but they certainly met afterwards. So George leaves. He's gone for about 10 years, and he's making an okay living. He's investing in land. Turns out, one of the pieces of land he invests in turns out to hold the Comstock lode. So pretty much overnight, he becomes a millionaire. The three of his investments actually turn out to be the top 3 mining programs in the U.S. So he becomes a very wealthy man very quickly. He returns to Missouri. His mother's not doing so well. This is also maybe when he meets Phoebe, but she'd be 18 at this point. And so they marry. and head back to California pretty immediately. That is when they purchased the first 40,000 acres at San Simeon, and they have their first and only child, William Randolph Hearst. But George purchases this land, thinking that he's going to mine it because he's a miner. That's what he's been doing for years. He was a miner in Missouri, and so he sees mineral deposits. That's a deep water bay. So he's thinking I'm going to be able to get my supplies here. Hopefully the railroad continues up this way. It doesn't, and it turns out to be more lucrative to have agriculture and turn it into a ranch, and so that's what happens. As William's growing up, he's growing up more so in San Francisco, but he's camping here with his father. And so he has a lot of fond memories of being up here. He calls it Camp Hill, and camping here with his father growing up. He's pretty keen on those so we don't stay up. Yes, yeah. Well, I'll point out some of those copies, and there's extension worked up. You can't tell what was original and what's not. One example of that is that the columns were constructed for the purpose of the hilltop. So Julian Morgan designed the colonnades. So the columns are new to Hearst time, but the columns that we see on the temple facade here, those are ancient Roman, somewhere between the 1st and 4th century AD. So yeah, it's quite a mix. So I mentioned that the pool that we're looking at is the 3rd version, but the original plan was actually a rose garden. It was not a pool at all. He didn't intend to have, I don't think, more than one pool. He was already working on the indoor pool, so this was going to be a rose garden. He's a big fan of flowers. And so it was going to be a rose garden with a temple facade and a reflecting pool. The temple facade is the only piece that made the cut from that original plan. But of course it was enlarged a couple times. So that first version of the pool wasn't necessarily Hearst changing his mind. We have some letters between Julian Morgan, the architect, and Hearst discussing reasons for building. And in 1924, in March, we have a letter from Hearst requesting that that she build a pool that's ready to swim in by summer. And that's because he's saying that Millicent, his wife, and his 5 boys are pretty anxious for a pool for summertime. It could be 110, 115 degrees on the hilltop. Right, so my addition to the letter is they're not going to want to run around a rose garden. They're going to need to swim and cool off, right? So she gets it done. The pool is ready to be swum in by August of the same year. So they're swimming in the pool, enjoying it, but of course it's not big enough. So a second version is constructed within a year. He's already wanting it to be bigger. And we can actually see the shape and size of the second version of that pool in the inner ring of the one that we look at now. Well, that looks kind of small, doesn't it? Probably not big enough for 5 boys to enjoy. So of course he makes it bigger, and now you see his 3rd version of the pool. The 3rd version came with a lot of other additions. So the colonnades on either side, those weren't there. As I said, the temple facade gets even larger. There's a couple other technological advancements that take place, and we'll talk more about those. As we get a better view of the pool from higher up, we're going to be on Neptune's terrace in just a moment. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the 3rd version of the pool. But while we make our way up the stairs, we're going to pass a door. And so there's something behind the door, obviously. I want you guys to think about what it might be, and we'll talk more about it, but it also was constructed during the third version of the pool. Any questions? Perfect. Feel free to use a hand round as we make our way up. Of that far mountain. So there's the mountain range, and then there's one that seems to be way in the distance. It looks like it might be the back of a camel, right? Is everyone seeing that? The one I'm pointing out? That would have been Hearst's property there. So he owned the mountains through here. He would have taken horses. He enjoyed riding horseback, camping out there. And so that would have been the line. So did anybody think about what it might have been behind the doors? What is behind those doors? There we go, yeah, it's usually not on the first guest. Yes, they are changing rooms. We're standing on the roof of 17 changing rooms. There's 10 for men and 7 for women. But if you were a guest of Hearst in the 30s, you would have been able to switch rooms if you wanted to go on the pool. He would have probably provided you swimsuits, he would have provided you swimsuits. You probably wouldn't have owned any, and certainly wouldn't have brought them as a guest of Hearst. So if you wanted to, you could put on the 100% wool unisex swimsuit and jump into the whole pool. Now that would have been before 1934, because with the third version of the pool, we get the heating of the pool, which is really nice. So if they knew that Hearst was coming, then they would have had to prep 2 days in advance for the pool to be heated, and it could get from 70 to 75 degrees. We do not heat the pool anymore, and we can't swim in it. But you would certainly want it to be heated at this time of year. It's pretty cold right now. What also came with the third version are the dressing rooms and the colonnades on either side, as I said before. Now those are designed by Julia Morgan. The columns, as I mentioned, they're marble, but the rest is steel reinforced concrete with some modern plastering. And so we're going to talk more about that technique. It was somewhat new during the time, pretty expensive, but it's definitely served her well to be constructing using those materials, considering she's building an earthquake country. She really started in San Francisco, so her buildings stood the test of time. Do you have any questions about pool, anything that we're seeing before we move on? Yeah?
Is that a guest?
This is actually the guest house that the terrace we were standing on before. That's his Casa del Sol. This is Casa del Monte.
That's a guest.
This is also a guest house.
Five guest house?
Only three. Only 3 guest houses. So this one faces the mountains, hence its name. Winston Churchill stayed here before he was Prime Minister. He was a guest of Hearst. And then we're going to pass the third guest cottage. That's called Casa del Bar. Guess where it faces. That's the one that is wheelchair accessible, and Hearst would have been living in that guest cottage near the end of his time up on the hilltop as he was in a wheelchair. So we'll pass that. That'll be the last guest cottage we see. But we're going to walk through the gardens before we do that. As I said, he's a big fan of flowers. He was very proud of this garden and he cared a lot about what was in it. In fact, 3% of the of their correspondence is about the garden. It's about what the shape, where flowers are being placed, which flowers are going in the garden. He wanted something to be at bloom at all times. So he really cares about the type of flowers, the colors that are going to be matching the tiles that we're seeing. And so we're going to get a chance to walk through that. It's not all original, but there are some flowers in bloom right now that we'll get to enjoy. Now it's going to bring us to our next stop, and we're going to see the oldest collection that exists on the hilltop. Of course, it's outside and it's not inside. It's over 3,000 years old, and so we saw some Greek and Roman influence here in the pool and that construction. We're going to see some different influence in the fountain we're going to see. So I'm going to ask some questions about that as we walk through. Are you ready to walk through the garden? All right, perfect.
So this is the fountain.
Well, as I mentioned, we saw some Greek and Roman influence in the pool. Anyone know where these pieces might come from? Yep. I asked because we had a kid one time respond, Las Vegas! So, just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Yes, this is Sekhmet. These are all depictions of Sekhmet. Sekhmet is the god, or the goddess, who protects the sun god Ra in ancient Egyptian mythology. The oldest piece here is 3,600 years old, and the youngest is just a mere 3,200 years old, making them the oldest pieces that we know of on the hilltop. Now he purchased these pieces during different times, mainly in the mid to late 1920s. But something happened in 1922 that really piqued the world's interest in Egypt. Anyone know what that was? I promise I won't ask any more questions after this. There we go, yeah. The discovery of King Tut's tomb in 1922 kind of sent the world into a little Egyptian craze. We see the flapper movement taking influence with the haircut, the flapper dress, even the makeup. The Art Deco style definitely is influenced by Egyptian design. And so that is the fountain is made in the Art Deco style, and it's designed by Julia Morgan, of course. The Esplanade we walk on, designed by Julia Morgan. Everything we pass is either overseen or directly designed by our architect, Julia Morgan, during the 28 years. And so she was in charge of designing this fountain. So she designs a very modern fountain for the time, so all these old pieces. She then takes some of the Egyptian influence and mythology and etches in lotus flowers around the exterior here. Not only does she bring that in, but she designs the tiles. So if we notice the tiles, they look like pyramids, right? There's more lotuses leading you up the stairs. So she's incorporating the where these pieces come from and putting it in a modern design. Something important to mention is, sorry, we actually they're tempting. It's tempting. Now something that's interesting that we see her consistently doing is she has to take in all of his collection. Now it's growing. Most of the things that we see here today on the hilltop were purchased after the structure had been built. So what Julie Morgan now has to do, she's also the interior designer, by the way. She's faced with taking in his ever-growing collection and fitting it into the rooms, into the structures, right into the structure of a fountain, or up on the walls. You're going to see tapestries. So she's tasked with trying to figure out where all these pieces are going to go, and sometimes they don't fit, right? She's already begun construction. This piece is too big. Actually, Neptune, sitting on top of the facade by the pool we were just in, his feet are cut off. It's because he didn't fit. He came with feet, but they just needed to fit him in the pediment. So they have no problem altering these old pieces to fit them in there. He actually doesn't have to be ancient Roman Neptune. He's only 18th, 19th century, but they're still chopping off his feet. So we're going to see how she's able to place his growing collection into the designs that she's creating. Definitely on the face of Casa Grande, and as we walk through the entertainment rooms. So we're going to get a better look at Casa Grande now. We'll walk over and we'll actually be standing on the most popular terrace for guests in the 30s as we get a better look at the house. To be the outdoor seating that we can sit on. This is the marble you can't touch. So if you want to take a seat, be my guest. It's probably going to be a little chilly. Set up. That was pretty good. We have some photos, historic photos that show that being set up. Hearst might be sitting in one of those chairs taking a business call. He had a phone in almost every room on the hilltop. And he also kept them outside, protected in boxes, so that whenever he needed to take a call, he could. He didn't have to run to a different room where he knew there would be a phone. He took after his father in that way of being kind of a workaholic. Didn't sleep very much, went to bed very late, he was on the newspaper time. So you might see Hearst there on a different day. There'll probably be some sunbathers. But so as we picture that, I'll introduce you to Casa Grande, what we're all staring at here. Now Casa Grande stands at 137 feet tall. That is not including the wind vanes up top. Those are 9 feet tall. They're from Italy. Not exactly sure how old they are. But as we look at the face of the building, it seems that it's stacked brick a little bit of an illusion. We're more looking at a concrete box. The limestone facade is only about 2 inches thick. The rest is a concrete box, steel reinforced concrete. Said we're going to wrap back around to that. And this is a point where I can introduce Julia Morgan, give her the respect that she deserves as the architect who made this possible. Now she's a trailblazer before Hearst hired her. She actually worked for Phoebe Hearst, his mother, for a little bit before William hired her. But way before then, she was one of the first women to graduate from UC Berkeley. She received her civil engineering degree there because they weren't offering architectural degrees yet. And so then she went on to study architecture as her professor had encouraged her to do. So of course, she goes to one of the top art schools in the world. It's called Paris. And there she waits about 2 years. She's not admitted to the school yet, but she's living in Paris, she's studying, she's preparing. And that's because they haven't let women in before, so they're not admitting her to the school. Not only is she waiting in Paris, taking the entrance exams, and competing with other men there, she's competing with the foreign population trying to get into the school. They have a limit on how many people from outside of France they allow into the school, because it's such a good school now, everyone's trying to flood into it. So not only is she fighting those two battles, she finally gets admitted, and that's because she scores so high on her entrance exam, they have no excuse to not let her in anymore. They have to. It'd be an embarrassment to the institution if they did not let her in. So she makes it in. Now she's a small woman, and people aren't thinking very fondly to her there. She's getting kind of bullied. People are throwing water on her head. They're pushing her around. She's also required to finish this program now in almost half the time that everyone else does. That's because there's an age cap on the program. She has to finish by the age of 30. Because it took her so long to gain entry, now she's a little bit behind. But she gets it done. So she ends up completing the program and she graduates. She's the first woman to receive a certificate in architecture from the Paul Bazaar. When she receives her certificate, she goes back to San Francisco, where she works under an architectural firm. She studies, she learns, but she's waiting to open her own. And so she finally does. And she becomes the first female licensed architect in California. Now she's designing and erecting buildings on her own, under her own firm. She's using that steel reinforced concrete engineering side of her education. And that serves her very well because her buildings stay standing after the earthquakes. And it really helps people trust the female architect at that time. It really helps her career. And so I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I told you she works for Phoebe. She builds an estate for Phoebe in Pleasanton. And then now we see she gets hired by Hearst in 1919 to build this estate. I don't know if you've noticed, it doesn't really look so much like a house, more of a cathedral, church, right? It takes a lot of influence from Spanish cathedrals and churches. And so the entire estate is built in a kind of Mediterranean revival style, popular during that time. This may be the church, then the surrounding cottages, the villages of a Mediterranean town, and then on the outskirts we see the ruins, which would have been the pool, the outdoor pool that we were standing at just a moment ago. So that's kind of the style in which the estate was built. On the face of this building, however, we can see that same combination of his old collection being mixed with modern techniques. A good rule of thumb for the face of this building is anything that looks kind of more sandy in color. Those are the pieces that are very accounts by his housekeepers, we know that most likely people would have gathered or assembled in the assembly room, and he would have waited for everyone to meet each other, and then from his room upstairs, taken an elevator down, and walked out of these choir stalls. That door right there is open. That's the one he probably would have walked out of to greet you and welcome you to his home. Now, it's where you would have met Hearst, but it's probably also the first room you're going to see as a guest. You wouldn't have been brought to your room first. Most likely, it would have been those doors that you walked through, that mosaic that you walked over, and this would have been your first experience at his ranch. Now, he never called it his castle. That was some other people, and certainly us now, 100 years later. But he would have referred to it as Camp Hill, as I said before, or the ranch. So on your invitation, in which the second you step out the door till you step back into your own home, everything is covered by Hearst. Your invitation would have invited you to his ranch, not to any sort of castle. You might have had some expectation because of the talk around town about his big estate on the hill, but this really would have been your first impression coming in here as a guest. Now, you would have met others. Maybe you stayed next to Charlie Chaplin. He was a frequent guest. Some other Hollywood stars and actresses, politicians, mayors, and you would have all probably been in this room under all this art. He would have wanted you to appreciate his art as well. Cocktail hours also held in this room. Now, during cocktail hour, you'd be waiting for dinner to start, and for Hearst to tell you that dinner time had come. So when I say an hour, it might not have been an hour. If conversation was flowing well, he would have extended dinner out as long as he wanted. Probably frustrating to his kitchen staff, but it would have been what he said. And so during cocktail hour, you only get one drink. You can't go back for another one unless you're really quick, some guests say. So you better nurse that one drink. That's not that Hearst didn't drink. He did, but he never overindulged, to our knowledge. And he expected his guests to act the same. So if it seemed like you had brought something in, if you were acting like you snuck something into the castle, he would probably have greeted you with your bags packed and somebody waiting at your door after dinner with all of your things packed and ready to escort you down the hill, and you would have not been invited to come back. Now, some of the accounts vary. Sometimes guests have said there was an open bar, but most of the accounts are that his butlers were known for serving notoriously weak drinks, and that one guest even said that the wine flowed like glue at the hilltop. So it was not kind of that party scene with a bunch of drinking that you might expect, not all the time at least. There's a lot to see here, so if you have any questions about what you're looking at, let me know. Hopefully I can answer them.
The seating is very legal, church-oriented.
It is.
Yeah.
It's actually not seating that the guests would have used, or that Hearst would have used. It's purely wallpaper. And his wallpaper is his wood paneling that he chose for the assembly room. Happens to be 15th and 16th century Italian choir stalls.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the guests would not have probably sat in these. Mm-hmm. It was more of a decoration.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, something interesting about the choir stalls is that the corners, especially in this on that side of the room, those are they're made because his woodworkers had to recreate what they were seeing. The extension work, the modern extension work during Hearst's time, is pretty amazing. They didn't have enough to extend through the room, so his woodworkers and painters were able to make it extend. We can also see that in the ceiling. There's only 5 to 7 original panels that come from Italy on the ceiling. The rest are they're recreated by his staff. And I had a coworker try to point out to me which ones he believed were original. He was laying on the ground with binoculars trying to figure it out. So it's pretty good work. Yeah, it's I don't know which ones are original and which aren't. So it's pretty impressive this work.
What is this above they're saying? Do you know what that is?
I don't. It's an altar to. I don't have it memorized. The piece. Do you know what the translation is above the door?
Loosely translated, it means this altar is dedicated out of devotion to Mary, God, and Saints Gregory and Joseph.
Awesome. Thank you.
More
There you go.
or less.
Okay.
decides it's dinner time, I'm not going to walk out of that door, but there's another hidden door behind me in the choir stalls, and that leads us to the refectory where we'll probably sit for dinner. So we're not going to sit and touch any of the chairs, but we're going to enter the refectory now. It's a pretty long room. We don't have a huge group, so it shouldn't be an issue, but just try to fill the room up as best you can.
You're right, she did, didn't she?
Let's step over just so you can hear me better. Try to avoid this. Well, welcome to where you're going to be eating dinner as a guest. In the 30s, this is where most meals would have been held, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner. During breakfast or lunch, you would have sat probably wherever you wanted to. And believe it or not, it would have been a little bit more casual, probably a buffet style. You serve yourself when you take a seat. He wanted it to be a little bit reminiscent of camping. I'm sure this screams camping dining, right? So in such a grandiose room, he tried his best, and we'll see some paper napkins. There's condiments in their original jars. This is probably how it would have been set up during Hearst time. No tablecloth, right? Just trying to really make it feel rugged in here. But his son confirms that he really thinks that the ketchup bottles are the nod to camp. Well, I mentioned Hearst camped up here when he was a boy with his father, but he inherited the land when he was 56. So he also brought his sons here camping while they were growing up. So they have those memories of that as well. So there's no head at the table, right? That's because Hearst wanted to be in the middle and he wanted to be able to talk to people. He would have sat here across from your hostess, Marion Davies. You'll notice Marion Davies is not Millicent Hearst. So your hostess is not his wife. It would actually be his girlfriend, Marion Davies. And so they married, him and Millicent, his wife, they married in 1903. They had their 5 boys. And by 1915, he had met Marion Davies. And they started seeing each other more. Millicent was aware pretty quickly, but allowed it to happen. And about 10 years later, she kind of had enough. So by 1926, she moves out back to New York, where they met and she's from. And they remained separated for the rest of his life and her life. Now, Marion Davies was a young dancer at the time. Now, when they met, she was about 16, and when they started really seeing each other, she was about 18 years old. And so she says that she started out a gold digger, but ended up in love. So the panels are all original, but the extension, there's some work to make it fit in the room that is
Fine China.
Whole room short, just stay on the blueberry carpet.
So similar to the assembly room, this wouldn't have been a room that you just go in at one point in the day. There was a lot of people filing in and out of here as guests. But what we hear most about from interviews with people who worked with Hearst or from guests of his is that this would have been the room you go in after dinner, most likely. It also would have probably not been where you spent your morning, but it might be where you wait for the movie to start after dinner. If you were dining with Hearst, you would have been given a menu. And at the bottom of that menu, you would have seen the film that you were going to watch later that night. I mentioned he's kind of a night owl, he doesn't sleep very much, and he might push back dinner. So maybe you start dinner at 10, you come in here, but you gotta digest, have your prescribed cigarette for digestion in here, and wait until the movie starts. So maybe you're starting the movie at 12 o'clock. And then you're gonna talk about the movie afterwards. So after 1930, when the theater was completed, this would have been the room that you talked about the movie in afterwards. So you would have come out here, sat on the chairs. There's one account by, if anyone knows who Alice Marble is, she was a tennis star in the 20s and 30s. She spent a lot of time here in her late teens, and so she remembers one time, post-1930, coming from the theater, talking with a top Hollywood director, and discussing rather heatedly, she recalls, one of the actresses in the films they just watched. And she says that the night goes on in this room well past 3 a.m. They're sitting on the Persian carpets, they're sprawled out, they're talking. Now, Hearst probably isn't there. He's probably upstairs, not asleep, but taking business calls and working. But he lets his guests kind of roam around and enjoy his place. So she says that they're talking all night, and it's one of the most exciting nights of her life, and that she really felt part of the movie scene when she was here. And so that probably would have been pretty common if you were a guest. You're surrounded by these Hollywood elites. You're seeing unreleased movies in that theater, maybe some that Hearst is responsible for, most likely. And you're definitely seeing movies starring Marion Davies. She was the second top paid actress during that time. Definitely thanks to Hearst, but she came out with a lot of movies, so she's definitely a talent too. Now, something also interesting just about the structure of this room is, again, the ceilings. These are imported ceilings. They're not Italian, these are Spanish ceilings. The three panels that seem a little bit brighter, those are actually the original Spanish ceilings. That extension work that we see, the perimeter is a little darker. That is the extension work done by Hearst woodworkers and painters. It was really hard to tell in the other room which ones were original and which weren't. Now this seems like maybe not so good of a job, but during Hearst's time, the bright panels that we're seeing were not that bright. They actually matched the exterior and they would have been a lot more dim. So we did restoration work on these ceilings and took out some of the dirt and grime that was there when Hearst owned these ceilings, and so we're seeing something brighter than he would have seen in his time. So the old looks new in this room, and the new kind of looks old. We're going to see another Spanish ceiling in our next room. That has gone through restoration work, but then it was restored to be the same color, and it's going to be a lot harder to tell where the extension work is. So this is a good example of what we see now, but those other two rooms, the one we're going to see also, we can really appreciate what good work they do. Yep?
Another antique mosaic here?
Yes, Roman mosaic. Welcome Matt from the back entrance, and welcome Matt from the front entrance. This would have probably, if it had developed more, there were some oak trees that got in the way of developing the east vestibule. He didn't want to cut down the oak trees. He needed them to be dug up and replanted and moved. So that was also a problem with construction and what took so long. But he wanted this to be a way that you could get into the main house via automobile. Would have tried to be kind of an entrance as well. Now, if we were waiting for the movie to start, we might also make our way into a kind of game room. It would be we're going to walk into the billiard room, see some pool tables, as we call them, but there are 2 billiard tables we're going to check out. Usually when I walk into this room, I like to point out on the side of the wall there's a computer. So just feel that as you walk by, and I'll talk about it when we get in there. Now, in the In the 19th century and in the early 1900s, a billiard room probably would have been more of a male retreat after dinner. So men and women would have separated. Men probably would have entered the billiard room. Certainly during Hearst time, more so on the East Coast where these kinds of estates were built and these kinds of parties were being thrown. Hearst was one of the first in the West Coast to build a property like this. But during his time, certainly it would have been normal or expected even for men and women to separate after dinner. If you were a guest at the of Hearst on the hilltop, that wouldn't have happened. So he kind of left that for others to partake in. What he was interested in, as I said in the refectory, was good conversation. So he wanted to be talking to people. It didn't matter who you were. If you could hold good conversation, he wanted you around. So we would have seen men and women playing with and against each other in this room. The billiard tables were actually brought in a little bit later. They were calling this a music room. We don't have a lot of evidence that live music was played in here. But it definitely did turn into a billiard room. And Hearst was known for being pretty good at pool, according to Marion Davies' niece. So he would have been in here quite often, according to her. Now, I asked you to notice the heater on the side of the wall. Now, that is original from the 30s. It's still working. And that brings us kind of into the technologies that he had on the hilltop. I mentioned he's been in the pool as well. We've been, in every room we've been in, there's been electricity. So he would have had electricity since day one on the hilltop. That's thanks to partially Julia Morgan and her team allowing for hydraulics and to create energy from runoff coming from a large mountain that's actually in view that's close to us. And so they would have had electricity since day one here. The lighting would have been brighter at Hearst time. It would have been a lot brighter in this room, but these are dimmed because it's museum lighting, so it can't be as bright. Got to protect all the artifacts. Actually, I'm standing right in front of a radio and also a phone. I'm a little bit in the way of it, but we're going to walk through the store so you get a better look when we do that. As I said, there were phones in almost every room. This radio was last tuned to channels in LA and San Francisco. He's a newsman. He's keeping up to date with everything. Now we're also going to walk past the piano I talked about earlier. That's electronically controlled, and the keys that are raised in the middle, they would control the 36 carillon bells that are in the towers or should have been in the towers above. They are not connected anymore, so don't be tempted to press on them. As we make our way through this little lobby, we're going to enter the theater. That was completed in 1930, a little hastily, but they wanted to be able to watch a movie with President Calvin Coolidge when he came to visit. So after he left, then that's when they put in a lot of the decorations. Hearst was unsatisfied with how it was in working condition. He needed it to be more grandiose, and so now we see the decorations they put in there. It's going to be a little bit dark when we walk in, so watch your step. Take a seat at any of the benches. You can sit on those as well. And we'll get started with some home films. We're going to see videos of Hearst in the 30s on the hilltop. We're going to see his guests. Some you may recognize. I'll be pointing out who they are. And we're also going to see clips of the animals in his private zoo. And then we'll make our way to the Roman pool after that, the indoor pool. So again, watch your step and make sure to take a look at the piano. Just make sure you're careful while you walk through the door because it is not. And you're going to have to put the latch on when we leave. course.